Okay, I think we can begin. Welcome to Serbia, Democracy, Dissent, and the New European Fault Line. I'm Misha Glenny. I'm the rector of the Institute for Human Sciences here in Vienna. I'm going to get our panelists to introduce themselves, but I would first of all like to welcome and introduce Vladan Đokić, who is the rector of the University of Belgrade from the architecture faculty in Belgrade, who has played such a positive and prominent role domestically and internationally in the movement which was sparked in November 2024 as a consequence of the tragedy in Novi Sad. We will be, the first session is going to go until 3:15, and then session 2 will start at 3:45. I'm afraid I am only going to be able to remain for the first session, but I'm extremely pleased to be here, and thank you very much to Dino Pasalic for organizing all of this. And without, I see Ivan Vejvoda is here. I hadn't spotted that yet. That's very, very good news for everyone. Perhaps if people around the table would like to introduce themselves, starting with Alexandra.
So, hello everyone. My name is Alexandra Baidi. I'm Slovenian interdisciplinary researcher and cultural manager, and I live here in Vienna. And I'm a RECAS fellow, so thank you so much for the invitation.
Hello everyone, I'm Jelena Vasiljevic. I'm a senior research associate at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, University of Belgrade.
Hello, my name is Hedvig Morvai. I'm the executive director for European democracy at the Erste Foundation, but originally I'm from Serbia and my background is in that region.
Also from Serbia, like Hedvig, and also from former Yugoslavia, like Hedvig, and others around the table. For the purposes of this meeting, I think to say that I'm the chair of the board of the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory in Belgrade.
Hi everyone, my name is Filip Ejdus. I am professor of security studies at the Faculty of Political Science, University of Belgrade.
Good afternoon, I'm Vladan Đokić, director of the University of Belgrade and professor of urban design, urban planning courses at the Faculty of Architecture.
I'm Michael Ignatieff, rector emeritus of Central European University, Budapest and Vienna, and I teach in the Department of Historical Studies at the university.
Just for everybody's information, Michael would be chairing this first session. Ivan.
Ivan Krastev, I'm political scientist, permanent fellow here, Bulgarian, but there are two Bulgarians there who know more than me on the dog boats. Maria Todorova and Galin Tikhanov are here, so I'm going to be the silent Bulgarian.
Good afternoon. My name is Sanja Bojanić. I'm the executive director of the Center for Advanced Studies in Rijeka, at the University of Rijeka, and actually a fellow here at the Institute. And I'm very happy to follow and join the RECAS fellows that are present here.
Hi everyone, my name is Aida Hedvig. I'm a researcher and teaching assistant at the University of Ljubljana, Center for International Relations and Chair for International Relations.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul Stubbs. I'm a Liverpool-born activist, sociologist who's lived and worked in Zagreb since 1993. I actually have a Croatian pension, so I'm emeritus fellow of the Institute of Economics in Zagreb and visiting fellow here at IWM.
I'd just like to say about Paul that for native English speakers, his introduction of "I'm from Liverpool" is entirely unnecessary, as you can hear it straight away.
Means my Serbo-Croatian is much better than my English, right?
Well, welcome to the audience, and welcome to everybody. I think we should plunge right into this. We have an hour, and we have exactly an hour. And I'd like to hand it over to Rector Đokić right away to introduce the pressures that academic freedom are under, the role of students in the leadership of this protest, the impact it's having on the political system, and how other institutions in the Serbian context are reacting, supporting, standing on the sidelines, whatever. That seems to me to be important. If I could just add 30 seconds of context, I am a veteran of Viktor Orban's expulsion of Central European University from Budapest, so I am full of very strong fellow feeling when a fellow rector of a university is under the kind of pressure that you've been under. It's not fun for a reason that isn't said often enough, which is that universities actually are not and should not be, let me make this point, political actors. We very deliberately position ourselves in a kind of liminal space, which is kind of civil society. It's not political. We talk about politics constantly. Our philosophers and political scientists have opinions and study the political system, but we try to defend a liminal space in which we can, frankly, bite the hand that feeds. And biting the hand that feeds is literally, in universities that depend exclusively on state funding, you're much more vulnerable. The university that I had the honor to lead had no state funding from anybody, which gave us a certain amount of pressure. But part of the dilemma of defending CU in that period was to keep saying, this is an attack on academic freedom. It is not an attack on a political actor. We're not a political actor in Hungary, in Budapest. This is a very difficult line to draw for a patriotic Serb and a leader of an institution, and I'm very curious to see how you deal with these pressures. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. A few days ago, we had at our university, at the Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory, one very famous person, Joseph Stiglitz, giving a lecture and receiving the award from the Institute, and the topic was academic freedom. And he mentioned the academic freedom, and he emphasized that the academic freedom is something which is very important, not just for the academia, but for society as well. And he was speaking about the American cases, about the academic freedom in the United States and the universities that are under pressure. But in the difference between the American case and the Serbian case is that in the United States there are a free media and there are a free and independent courts who are pushing back the attacks on the universities. In Serbian case, it's not the solution, and it's a completely different situation. We don't have a free media, and we don't have the independent courts and independent prosecutors and independent things that can somehow protect the academic freedom in our country. So there is a big pressure to academia. As you know, a year ago, the protest started in the way of blocking the university buildings, and the students stopped the classes, and we didn't have classes for a whole semester. And it was the big protest which was caused, or I can maybe better say target, with the collapse of the canopy of the railway station in Novi Sad, where there was still the reconstruction of the station, killing 16 people. And that was the trigger for the students to start to protest and to somehow call for the state and to the institutions in the state to act and to take the responsibility of that. And we saw in this whole year that this student protest somehow changed the way of the thinking in our society, and the many citizens, the majority of the citizens are supporting the students, and it became more than a student protest, it became some kind of rebel and some kind of, let's say, rebel for the better future, for the institutions to work by themselves, to rule of law, to democracy, to human rights, and everything else. Our university, and me as well, by myself, supported the students from the very beginning of the protest. From December 9th of last year was the day when we proclaimed our support. It was just at the beginning of protest. And that was the reason why not only the students, but the university professors are under the very difficult and very strong pressure from the state, of maybe it's better to say not from the state, but from the representatives of the state, because I think that universities are much more valuable for the state than the politicians who are now acting in our political scene in Serbia. So there were, I can say, three ways of pressure against the academia regarding the academic freedom. One is let's say, the professional pressure which is taking place in the courts. So all the deans of our faculty, we have 31 faculties, have the charges of not having the classes in the last semester, so they're accused of not having the classes. 2 of deans, all vice rectors, are 4 of them, and me have criminal charges for that. And we are accused by the prosecutor for not having the classes. And I have 2 more, so I have 3 criminal charges from the prosecution in our country regarding the support of the students and not having classes in the last semester. This is one way of pressure. The other way of pressure is the financial pressure. As you said, we are the state university, so we are funded by the state, and we are most of the money that we receive for our programs and for our education system are from the state. We have very few money that we receive from our own expenses, and they started to cut this financial support in many different ways. One of the ways was that they cut the salaries. So in 3 or 4 months in the beginning of this year, we received just the 10 to 12% of our salaries. They cut the material expenses. They started to close the accounts that we have to having according to have the international Erasmus and other projects with the foreign international organizations and universities. They cut the other fees that they are, according to law, supposed to give to the university in Serbia. So this is, let's say, the financial pressure. And the third one is the media pressure, where the media is targeting all the students and all the professors who are supporting them and all the people from academia, not just the journalists, but the state representatives who are saying the lies and very bad things about all the people who are supporting the students in academia, as well as all the other peoples who are not from academia, but who support the students' protests in the way. So this is, let's say, the situation in which we are now dealing after the year, and these 3 types of pressure are still on the table. Some things are regarding the process changed from the beginning, but maybe this is the topic for the later. So I think this is let's say, for introduction, enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Rector, we're going to want to pursue the emergence and development of the student movement and its potential impact on politics. But before we go there, I think I just want to open it up for comments or questions from anybody with all these distinguished name tags. Anybody? Questions, thoughts? Well, let me ask a question while you figure out one for yourself, which is, what level of solidarity have you encountered from other institutions in Serbian society, beginning with the Academy of Sciences, other universities in the Serbian system, professional associations, I don't know, lawyers, doctors, whatever. Have you had any support from any of these institutions, or do you feel you're fighting a battle on your own?
There is a very little support. I mean, I cannot say that we are fighting alone. We have some support, but not institutional support. We have mostly support from the people in institutions. For example, the Serbian Academy of Arts and Science, we didn't have any support from them as an institution, but we have support from a couple of academics, maybe 9 or 10 of them who wrote the support of the students and the university academia people. We have support from some lawyers, but also from some individual lawyers. We have support from some high school teachers, high school professors. We have some support from the actors, but it's very difficult to have the institutional support. The University of Belgrade is not the only university who is attacked in our country. I must say there are 6 state universities. There are 2 universities in Belgrade, University of Belgrade and University of Arts in Belgrade. There are 4 more universities in different cities, University of Novi Sad, University of Niš, University of Kragujevac, and University of Novi Pazar, who are in the very similar, but not that kind of pressure like our university, because our university is the biggest one, the most important one. We are educated more than 40% of population of the student population in our country. So we are let's say the main target for our regime. I believe that some further support and some support from other categories of our society would be something that the student movement really needs.
Sorry?
The student movement needs.
Yeah.
Michael? Sorry.
Yes.
May I add just to what the rector said? The student movement at the university really got civic support. And as the rector said, this is a Serbia-wide protest of students. So Novi Sad, Niš, Kragujevac, all these places. Usually, historically, it was always Belgrade, even before World War II, etc. But now it's Serbia-wide. And I'd like to sort of highlight the fact that when the rector said that actors, lawyers, there was a big movement of the Association of Lawyers. And then 500 judges at one point and prosecutors signed a letter as well. In fact, so much so that the National Theater of Serbia has been taken over by the regime's people, and the actors are doing protests in front of the theater. So it's really a society-wide protest. We can, surmise exactly how many. We'll talk about ratings and things, but there's a protest that will happen in Novi Pazar, in the Sanja region on the 21st, where this particular university is under huge pressure because, of course, in the province, you can more easily repress than in the capital city. There will be a congregation of people. Many of our friends are going from Belgrade and other cities to give solidarity to that university, where literally professors are being thrown out, students are losing their accreditation and moving. And that whole thing about the ethnic distance being lost now between the Bosniaks and Serbs is another topic that we can look at. And so it is broader than it may seem from what we're hearing in the international press.
Sorry, Helena. Yeah, I mean, thanks for that very clear outline of the pressures. I want to just ask two things from that. Financial pressure you mentioned only in terms of the situation of universities and institutions, but isn't there also financial pressure on professors themselves, that salaries have been withheld or delayed or reduced, and that, you know, the longer that goes on, the worse it is. And I wonder whether you would add a fourth pressure, which is the threat of violence. The last time I was in Belgrade, the center of Belgrade was basically a tented city of people loyal to Vučić who are there to provoke violence. And I wonder whether that's a pressure that you're having to deal with. Thank you.
Yeah, there is a permanent pressure, as you said. There is still this, let's say, camp, or I don't know how to call it, this space in front of the parliament, which is like a gated community for some pro-government people who are there. And of course, there is some kind of pressure and risks that there will be the possibility of some conflict between them and some other protesters in the city. This is always something that is in our mind and something which is supposed to take care of it. Yeah.
Elena, just before I go to Elena, I'm wondering whether you had anything in additional to say, because you're saying, I'm alone, and Ivan is saying, actually, there's more solidarity. I'm wondering whether you can just comment on
you
that.
asked for institutional support, so I'm saying that the institutions do not support, but the people, some people support, of course. As I said at the beginning, this movement is now not just the student movement. The majority of the population are now in favor of student movement, and I can maybe say that maybe 2/3 of the population is somehow in favor of changes in our country. But I'm saying that the institutions are not supporting, but the people are supporting. So we have the people organizing themselves in the small community parts of the city and now taking part in the process together with the students. And somehow it's now not just the student protest, it's the movement that's, let's say, woke up the whole community, but not institutions.
Yes, I would just add a comment to that. When our university was attacked by Orban, the institutional silence around us was complete. And when a student put out a thing on Facebook saying we should gather on Sunday to protest, 80,000 people crossed the chain bridge and massed in front of Parliament. So it's the same thing, institutional silence but popular support. Yelena.
And precisely, I wanted to make a comment on this solidarity, the lack of it, or actually the presence of solidarity. That on the one hand, it's true that we didn't have that much institutional solidarity, but also you have to understand the chaos in which Serbian public is, and it's very because of the media capture and because of the complete control of media. People are not really informed about all the things and all the pressures that are happening at the institution. For instance, many of my colleagues who could not work at university were not aware of the fact that university professors were not receiving their salaries. You know, that was not really something, that was not an information you could hear on TV and you can read in newspapers. So many people were not really aware of that. And plus there is this idea that university professors belong to this privileged class of society, you know, so there's not much understanding for that. But, you know, you have to understand the chaos of that we don't really have a public sphere in which you can circulate the information. But on the other hand, this bottom-up solidarity was really impressive. And I think that I would just give an example of not university professors, but high school and elementary school teachers, because they were also hit very hard. At one point in December and January, beginning of this year, many schools and many professors, teachers individually went on strike. And they were severely punished, so they did not receive salaries for a couple of months. And that was even harsher for them because their salaries are lower, much lower than university professor salaries. And then IT community organized this impressive network of help. They mobilized citizens to reach out to them. They organized this impressive network where peer-to-peer support was able to happen. So you, as an interested citizen, could sign in, and you would be given an information about a particular teacher and their predicament, and you could send them money. And an estimation is that like many, tens of thousands, hundreds of teachers received help in this way. So that was an immense display of solidarity, and people really motivated to participate in that. And also, when things were happening in smaller communities, in villages, when students would march, you could see these outbursts of solidarity and people really wanting to show that they are part of this movement. And I think that this has to do with the fact that the brutality of this regime is not only state capture and institutional capture. We hear about that all the time, but it's also the societal capture. Like they really destroy the society with a big S. And I think that citizens feel this, and they intuitively feel this need to show solidarity and to partake in this rebuilding of social cohesion to this solidarity. So I think that this is really the most impressive thing that happened during this protest, of how much people are willing to show their solidarity and to show their readiness to be part of this great movement and to kind of reconstruct the destroyed society.
Just before I go to Hedvig, I'm wondering whether you could add a sentence or two about destroying society. It's a very strong and important thing, and Orban is doing something that sounds a little like that. I'm just wondering whether you could give me examples of what you mean by a regime destroying society.
Because all the institutions are captured, and because you know that there's the regime, they have a grip on all important elements of the society, you have many citizens. There's a certain paradox in the Serbian society. So unlike 90s and during Milosevic, you don't have such an economic terrible situation. In the 90s, that was a total chaos, and there was wars and authoritarian regime. Now you have an authoritarian regime that in some aspects is even worse. I would say, like, for instance, that media control is even worse today than it was during Milosevic's time. But you don't have such a grave economic situation, you don't have wars, and you have portions of society that economically are well off, right? But they live in society where institutions are captured. And then many of them opt to live in their own bubbles. Like, this is what you would hear, especially before the protests. You would hear many people, especially those, for instance, working in the universities, people belonging to urban middle classes. They would say, okay, I have my own bubbles. I don't read newspapers. I don't watch TV. It's awful. Everything around me is awful. I try not to have contact with these people because everything is completely absorbed under control of the regime. But I have my people, my society, the places where I go, my labyrinths. So people kind of withdrew. It's a sort of an internal immigration. They withdrew to their own circles and to their own bubbles. And I would say that the first time when this bubble was burst, and now I may be meandering, going into a different topic, but when we had this mass school shooting in Belgrade, when that happened 2 years ago, even though that shooting has nothing to do with the regime, but I also feel that citizens intuitively felt the connection between this violence and the violence of regime, even though I'm saying, of course, there is no connection between the two. But it was like, okay, even our bubbles are not impenetrable. Like, you cannot go to your bubbles because we have now things like this mass shooting. And I think this is also one of the reasons why we have such a massive protest after this shooting, because immediately after the shootings, we had the whole summer of massive protests. Of Serbia Against Violence was this banner under which they took place, and then we had these elections by the end of that year. But I think that it's this idea, like, people withdrew to their own bubbles, and this is what destroyed society with big S, but the violence and it kind of shows you that you're not safe in your bubble, and that the only option is actually to rebuild society.
Hedvig?
Thank you. Well, actually, it's a follow-up on what has been said, because I think it's very important to underline that, you know, this is happening in a society which, I mean, no one saw this coming, because that society was so much captured, lethargic, living in a fear, in a complete fear of voicing anything publicly, and also disabled, because there are no channels. I mean, there are these kind of online possibilities, maybe even some media, but which is not really in the mainstream. So it was very difficult, even after such tragedies as the school shooting. There were protests, and in the years before there were protests, but something massive like this was not possible to emerge. And also, you know, it's a deeply clientelistic system. So everyone owes something to the regime, and it's very difficult to basically move these people out of this sense of fear and connection and being captured. So what I want to say is that I believe that somehow after this more than a year, I think it's getting more and more difficult. On one hand, it is a protest of the universities and the students still. It is also the societies involved, but there is not enough solidarity. You know, the majority of people, they just live their normal lives as business as usual. In the front of the parliament, there is this Chatziland, this emerged something which is out there provoking. People are passing by, but in the other parts of Belgrade, people behave as if nothing was going on. So I think that after this more than a year, and when elections are not really in sight, when no one knows what to do with Serbia, there is no strategy in the EU. You know, there is no idea about how to really approach this, even though we see some signs that the atmosphere is changing. But I think that for the sake of these protests, of the student protests, it would be so important to finally claim major results and achievements, because it is remarkable, truly remarkable. No one expected this generation to be able to mobilize the society to such a level, to organize in the way they organize, to behave the way they behave, to contribute to this inter-ethnic and intercultural communication and cooperation, what happened with Novi Pazar, that we are seeing students from Novi Pazar, Muslim students, carrying the Serbian flag. I mean, that no one could expect. I think that somehow, you know, it would be great if the students package a message clarifying the major achievements, and not allow this to kind of, you know, exactly, and to continue with this unclear future, because it's fully unclear what the future actually and how it is going to resolve. So maybe it would be important to somehow set a milestone and define it and say, yes, we achieved this, and now the next phase will be targeted towards something different, because that could give a new push also to the society to direct the efforts, even though it's politically not clearly channeled, but to give some kind of a direction for the next step.
Just before I turn to Misha, I think that's where we want to transition next, is to think about, understand a little bit first about how the student mobilization achieved those results, what made this possible to break the silence and passivity, and then look at the more difficult question of where this thing is headed, because I think behind your statement is a worry about dissipation, that this drains away into the sand in some way. Misha?
Yes, I want to take up on that. It's worth remembering that this protest movement was prefaced by a smaller protest movement about the exploitation of the Yadar Valley and the lithium in the Yadar Valley, which resulted in, at the very least, a tactical, if not a strategic defeat for President Vučić, and certainly for the European Union as well. But of course, Yadar Valley was a very focused and concrete protest movement where the goal was very simple. Nonetheless, I think it was an important preface to what happened after Novi Sad, that it actually had empowered people in Serbia, that they could influence politics in some way. The challenge for the current protest movement is exactly what Hedvig was pointing to. But it's worth bearing in mind, I mean, our title is Democracy, Dissent, and the New European Fault Line. Well, there isn't a single European fault line at the moment. There are several European fault lines going on. And this is becoming a time of insurgency, very different insurgencies. Next door, there's Peter Magyar. We've just seen the Bulgarian government resign. We have huge demonstrations against immigration in the United Kingdom, the like of which we have never seen before in our country. So they're all very culturally specific and going into a different political environment, as it were. So Bulgaria succeeds because there is obvious fragmentation in the political elite. There is less obvious fragmentation in Serbia, with so much concentrated in the hands of Vučić, and the opposition itself being, let's be honest, pretty hopeless for one reason or another. So that comes to the great challenge for this protest movement, led by students who actively eschew the path of political parties up until now. But I'm very interested to hear from our colleagues from Serbia in particular that we have reached a watershed now where it's no longer good enough just to go on protesting. There has to be a political strategy behind it. And how does one do that with a movement which has explicitly rejected the idea of conventional politics as we know it up until now? And so that, I think, is the challenge that is faced. But this is, you know, I mean, they immediately started talking about Bulgaria as being the Gen Z revolution. This was much more of a Gen Z revolution, in my opinion, than the Bulgarian was, or at least you could argue that they both are. So is that generation now capable of coming up with original new forms that will impact on the structures of power inside Serbia, which are relatively visible? We know who they are, we know how they operate, and so on and so forth.
I noticed that the silent Bulgarian is not going to be silent. I didn't think you'd be silent for long.
No, but just it's a footnote. Bulgarian protests have been organized and led by the opposition. And this is a major story. In a certain way, here students are autonomous actor. In the Bulgarian case, of course, by the way, like in Serbia, the protests were very big and as a result very diverse in their political beliefs and stories, but you don't have the opposition problem, so it's...
Who wanted to venture into the question that's been raised here, which is, you've got a discredited opposition, you've got a Gen Z protest that has acquired enormous moral credibility for its courage and its inventiveness and its capacity to transcend ethnic borders, but it doesn't appear to have a strategy for contesting power, which is what I think a political strategy means. And you've got elections coming up in 2026, is that right? So what's your sense of whether there is in the student opposition a capacity to develop a political strategy that could actually challenge the Vučić regime? That's, I guess, the question. I wonder who would like to come in? Sorry, my peripheral vision is not very good, I think.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to that question. I just wanted to add to the list of organizations or like parts of society that express solidarity, diaspora, if it can be counted as part of our society. I think it could, and it showed this time around that they are super interested to help with fundraising, with campaigning, and in all sorts of different ways. They activated in full support of the university, but also the student movement. Also, we should not remember the CSOs and NGOs and youth organizations, which did their fair share of work during the protest, especially, for instance, during the sound cannon affair, during the mass protests of the March 15. They really collected a lot of data. They supported the victims. They campaigned internationally. So I think we should not forget them. And some of their representatives are actually being charged with, serious offenses. Some are detained, especially members of the youth organizations that we should, and some are in exile. And finally, professional associations such as health workers, but also, the associations of psychologists, the association of lawyers were mentioned, and various other professional associations, they all jumped in. Now, did they have the skin in the game the way we did at the university? Probably not, because their salaries were not withdrawn, and with the exception of the youth activists who really are detained or in exile, most of these organizations express their kind of, let's say, symbolic support, and they joined the protest, which is not to be neglected, but still the skin in the game was and still is with students and universities mostly. Now, when it comes to the second question of the capacities of the student movement to really bring about some kind of sustainable change, I think that we should avoid the pitfalls of two equally, I think, misleading understanding of the student movement. On the one hand, we have this totally unrealistic optimism and enthusiasm, which idealizes the student movement as this immaculate, force of nature, which will transform substantially and democratize Serbian society and bring about justice and democracy and everything. And part of this story is also that actually the Vučić regime has already fallen. He's a dead, his political corpse. Somebody just needs to inform him and to declare the body dead and bring them to the morgue. So the job is already done, whereas in fact it's not. I mean, we're far from there. And then the other extreme is maybe not so much in the public, sometimes in the public, but more in the private conversations, is this doom and gloom pessimism that the student movement is taken over by the right, it's taken over by the far left, it's infiltrated by the secret service. They're polarized, they are nationalists, they are Christian fundamentalists, they are pro-Russian. They will never be able to come together and democratize society. They will fall apart. And in as much I understand those two kind of, let's say, narratives, they're driven by emotions. They're driven by emotions of either hope on the one hand, or even catharsis, that this is like this moment in history where everything will change, or they're driven by anxieties and fears that everything will collapse and that the regime will strike back and it will become one big Belarus or small Belarus. So I think I like to see this from maybe a more realistic perspective. I see this student movement as really a pragmatic, authentic response of a society to a spin dictatorship, which for the past 12 or 13 years has ruled the country, among other things, through enormous media propaganda, control of the media, smear campaigns, discreditation, fragmentation of the opposition, all sorts of tricks and pressures to basically, totally destroy any organized opposition to the regime. So the students came up with this antidote to this spin dictatorship, which actually is depersonalized, it's decentralized, it's almost de-ideologized. There is an ideological minimum, rule of law and democracy, but just enough so that you can divide the people over the issues of Kosovo or the EU or left or right. So it's a minimal common denominator. And the enemy is this abstract young person, student, whom you cannot grind in the media machinery because it's an apple, a motherhood and apple pie. You can't really go after that. You crack your teeth. The media machinery cracks its teeth. And it proved to be very fit for purpose. I think the regime has not found any sort of response to such a direct democracy, decentralized, network-centric resistance to this regime. Now, whether it will be fit for purpose to really challenge the regime in the next elections, 2026 or 2027, we still don't know. Everyone has their doubts. There is a so-called student list. Students will run in the elections. According to the polls, they are ahead of the regime. They still did not come out with the names of the list, which is, I think, smart, because the moment they put out the names, the media machinery will start grinding them. But at some point, they will have to come out with the names. And then the question will be whether the student list really can have organizational, ideological, financial, operational, and other capacities to challenge this regime in a very unfair situation. The elections are not going to be free and fair. They're going to be worse than the ones in 2023. And in the local elections, we see that they're doing a sort of warm-up for the national elections. They're stealing more than rigging elections more than they've ever done. Utilizing all sorts of tricks from the Bulgarian train through, electoral migration to all sorts of other violence. I think it remains to be seen, but for the time being, I think we should see it as an authentic, pragmatic response, which is delivering. The next phase will be the elections, which are going to be, as mentioned, 2026 or 2027, but at the time being, we don't have anything better. This is our best chance. And today, and with this I'll finish, for this to really succeed, there needs to be a conflagration of several things. United front with the rebelled society, with the opposition, which we still don't have. That's one thing. The other is international support, which is not entirely clear. And we need to keep up the levels of mass mobilization the way we saw over the last year. So we have to have, general population willing to put their skin in the game and to challenge, to protest, and to defend the results in the next elections.
A quick footnote. Yeah. Just on the issue of the claim that this is being taken over or it's been infiltrated by nationalists. This is something which this is a thesis which has been encouraged outside of Serbia in particular, that somehow this student movement is reactionary, it has a focus on Kosovo and so on. I have had several journalists ring me up and say, I'm doing this piece on Serbia and I want to point out that these students are not all they seem to be, blah, blah, blah. And when I ask them what their sources are, they say, well, I read an article which suggested that it's being taken over by nationalists and right-wingers. And this is a targeted strategy of the regime in order precisely to undermine any international support, and particularly inside the European Union, because that then has an impact in Brussels, in Strasbourg, and so on.
John, and then Paul. Ivan?
Yeah, just to follow up on everything that's been said and to your question, Michael, some sort of two general points. I think what we've seen with the surprising uprising of the students is that there's been a learning curve because when we defeated Milosevic back in 2000, it was, again, a very composite coalition of 17 parties that went from left to right. You could only defeat Milosevic if you put everyone who didn't like him together and then defeat him. And that's, I think, the approach that we're seeing now. Because the regime is so strong and has captured institutions, is rigging elections, etc., you have to have that front. And there are the issues that everyone has pointed out between students and opposition parties, to speak simply. So the students, because we did not, quote unquote, succeed in 2000, we didn't have the famous October 6th, meaning cleaning up the system, they, I think, have an exaggeration of the need for purification of society. They see it's all poisoned, it's all vitriolic, and so I think they go to the other extreme and they say, you know, we're doing this without anybody's help. EU, opposition parties, and I think it's their way to try and set, I'm not saying I'm agreeing with it, it's their way in which to set a foundation from which the change can begin. And let's remind ourselves, the purpose of the student list, which many people don't know or forget, is to have an interim situation. So they do not pretend that these people on the list is composed of doctors, lawyers, engineers, you know, prominent people, experts. So this is not a kind of fluffy thing. They're very carefully looking at it, covering the various ideological spans that will, given the possibility of a victory probably in December 26, or as Filip was saying, beginning of 27, just prepare then the ground during a year and a half for free and fair elections. So it's a kind of interim expert government, if you want. That's the goal of it. Of course, there will be students who will join parties later on. I mean, this we've seen that throughout history. It's not that they all just want to leave. Secondly, I think what and we don't need to dwell on it too much, but I think what we're seeing is a true experiment in democracy, direct democracy, democratic imagination, democratic inventiveness of these plenary sessions that are called plenums, where it's a very laborious system of decision making. I mean, I don't know if this is being taped or not, but you know, they have a system whereby if they are supposed to meet a Joe Stiglitz over the weekend, they have to vote on it, who will go and who will. So it's very laborious, sometimes to a huge degree of ineffectiveness because it takes time. But they're insisting on this because, again, of the poisoned system and the captured state. Now we'll see how this turns out in the end. But I insist on this, and you know, I've said it for a long time over this past year, you know, maybe a bit grandiloquently. This reminds me of the Paris Commune or the French Revolution. It's a we the people moment, literally. I mean, when you're in a situation like this, there's no other way than to stand up by yourself. Do not count on anyone else. And I think that they, because it was unsuccessful on October 6th, and we all remind ourselves of Zoran Đinđić's sentence when they took power. He said, we should never have such a regime again in Serbia, and yet we got it again. And I think that's what permeates when we ask, well, how come these students suddenly arose? Well, they learned the history through their parents, through us who were there in the streets. Maybe we were holding them by the hand as we were on October 5th defeating Milosevic. Secondly, it's harder to leave than it was 10 years ago. They've decided to make a stand. This is our country. We want to stay here, and we have bitten the bullet. And final point, about this petering out or disappearing into quicksand, my personal impression from talking to everyone and various sort of people in society is that the will to change is there. And it will not disappear if the protests subside. It will reemerge like a river that goes underground on the day of the election. And we are all hostage to the electoral calendar because what everyone agrees on is this has to be resolved by elections, not in the street.
Just before I go to Paul, just direct question. This theme of purity is extreme, purification is extremely powerful idea. But you also said they're going to have to make some arrangement with the existing opposition parties. Aren't these in a contradiction that can't be bridged?
Well, I'm sure Filip and Jan and others know more. I'm sure there must be some context. I mean, and they're very careful about not revealing anything, and they're trying to keep that purity. As I said, that it's ineffective and may be counterproductive at some point. But as things stand now, and there are other younger people here who could maybe say something to this, I think they are determined to go it alone. And parties that want to join, for example, the Democratic Party of Zoran Đinđić has said, we're with the students. We're throwing our lot with you guys. We're not going to have a list separately. And I think that will be, so as things stand now, there will be the student list backed by, I think, what seems to be a majority at this point, and then maybe some oppositional parties that will run that are very weak in the opinion polls that are being done at this moment.
Paul?
Yeah, just a quick point following up from Filip and Ivan. I mean, I think probably no one saw it coming, you know, like 15 years of conversations with university professors in Serbia. My students are really apolitical, they're not interested. I mean, I think the same humility that we as older intellectuals have to show because of the nature of this, the origins of this protest, suggests we need to tear up the lexicon of how we understand movement actions, and that we shouldn't prematurely insist on outcomes, strategies, outcomes, measurable objectives, you know, the neoliberal language of NGOs. Because I think three things are happening from my understanding here. One, and you both talked about it, these are experiments in new forms of liberal democracy, of direct democracy, which means that the role models are the student protests earlier in the 2010s in Serbia and in Croatia, and the protests around Banja Lucia and the floods in Bosnia-Herzegovina and the plenum movement, right? The second point, which I think is really important, is that, of course, students are talking to everybody and anybody, but they're doing it on their terms. Filip's point about anonymity is really important. So instead of listening, you know, it feels like the times they are a changing moment to me. It feels like, you know, the old people have got to get out of the way and start to actually understand that there is a new lexicon here. All right? The final point I want to make is that I think there is something really interesting going on here, which is different from some earlier protests in Serbia, which is that every student is going to every single part of Serbia and doing what I would call community organizing. They're actually not content to be an urban middle-class bubble. They really are spreading this. So, you know, perhaps Ivan and I are a bit too close to one of your optimistic polls, Filip, but I think that there's a new lexicon of protest here, which older liberal intellectuals just have to kind of learn to understand or get out of the way.
Michael, may I add a footnote? Sorry, there's so much to say and so little time. The government and the regime has been on the back foot basically since January. A year ago, the students took over the narrative, and the government has been reacting, doing copycat stuff. And as the rector said, the pressure on the university and the smear campaigns have been absolutely obnoxious. I mean, for people who don't know, the students have been called fascists, Ustasha, Nazis. They have been charged with actually provoking the canopy disaster so that they could, literally, the Speaker of the Parliament said it is the students who organized the collapse of the canopy. And not because he's here, but the attack on Filip, anti-Semitic attack, was absolutely horrible, shown with packets of 500 euro notes, seemingly in Zagreb, going to receive from enemies of the state and saying, you know, this is an I mean, I don't know how bad it can get. And it's worse because these attacks are continued. The regime simply doesn't know. That's where the anonymity comes in. So they're singling out a certain number of people. And other professors have, you know, we could name them all here. It's horrible to watch. And as most of you know, Vučić is on television every single night explaining everything that's going on. Of course, calling this a color revolution, and that, you know, the Russians are out to get us, and then to Russian diplomats saying, actually, the West is after us, they want to get us down. So the fictionality of the spin of the dictator is, you know, it's wonderful. I think a wonderful book will be written, even though he said that he would write a world bestseller, how he defeated the the colored revolution.
But I think this is very powerful. I mean, you know, times are changing. Okay, got that. Click. But then you get this absolutely ferocious counterattack from regime media. If I can draw a momentary parallel with the Hungarian situation, something slightly similar. You've got total, relentless, 24/7 media control, and this is in fact a regime type. Both of these regimes, well, Orban does not use very extensive forms of police violence. Serbia, it may be different, much rougher, but it's 24/7 media attack. The news that you see in Hungary, and I guess this is my question, is counter media has fought back with incredible speed. You have no access to the public broadcasting system or the commercial broadcasting system, so it's all on your own media channels. But Magyar now draws crowds equivalent to the Orban crowd because he's developed alternative strategies of mobilization. What I can't figure out, Ivan, is whether you're saying this horrible attack is going to prevail, or whether you're saying it's actually bound to defeat. I can't predict for me how this goes, because it's not clear to me how a counter movement can overthrow concentrated media power from the state of this blanketing, vicious character.
Against hope that he can turn the tide, and that with all this propaganda that he can keep his core voters. And let's bring in the whole issue of the Serbian petroleum company that is about to be nationalized, probably because the Russians are also squeezing him, as is Trump. But I think that part of the population, I'm sure, is under the influence of the national public television. We do have the independent television stations that are seen only on cable, and only about 30% of the population can see that. So it's very restricted. And of course, the young people are all on social media. Nobody watches television anymore.
Just wanted to add to what Ivan said. The regime totally lost the battle in the social media. I mean, they tried with all sorts of bots and boosting, but I think they miserably failed to kind of dominate in the social media, because the youth, they're much more tech savvy. They know how to use Instagram. They know how they're on those networks 24/7, and they dominate the social media entirely. As Ivan said, TV. I mean, young people and students, they don't take their news from TV and newspapers. We knew it even before the protests, according to all sociological investigations that only a fraction of young people ever read broadsheets or take their news from TV. So that doesn't help. And just one last point about the outcome and the way they're organized. Direct democracy, decentralization, depersonalization. It's a blessing, but it's also a curse because it simply doesn't help student movement to have an agency, to negotiate, to meet, because they don't have representatives. And who is going to negotiate with, okay, today the opposition parties, and tomorrow, let's imagine the regime loses election, then you need to negotiate with the security sector, with the police, with the different institutions. You need to come into daily nitty-gritty, everyday politics, and we still, maybe at some point, the kind of the executive arm of the student movement will crystallize, will emerge, but for the time being, it doesn't exist, or at least maybe it exists behind the scenes, we are unaware of it, but it's very fragile, even if it exists. Some certain working groups exist, they have certain representative mandate, but still they're very vulnerable to the so-called distancing. The moment somebody sticks their neck into the media or due to regime propaganda, immediately you can have like a few dozen student plenums distancing from this person or that group or that person, and it's a curse. For the time being, the student movement, I don't see they found sort of a formula to really move into the next phase of capturing or maybe like taking over the government. But hopefully time will help them come up with certain organizational forms that will work.
We are 5 minutes from the end of our session. Ivan, Helena, Alexandra, it's going to have to be short. Let's put it all together. And then Rector Đokić may want to add a final word. I don't know. You can keep silent, or well, I'll bring you in at the end. So let's Ivan, Lena, Alexandra, and then the rector.
Thank you very much. I have been doing some research on the protest movements 2010-2014, and this is the major story. One of the interesting stories about Serbia is the unity of the elite in a situation in which basically you can expect them to be much more split. And the reason is that you do not have with whom to negotiate. It's very difficult because even if they want to defect, they should defect to Mars. And most of these people are defecting for personal reasons. I mean, not for high morality issues. And as a result of it, something that is a strength at one moment of the movement is becoming the weakness. It's great to have a mobilization in the early stage, but particularly in the moment in which social media is so important, social media helps personalization of politics. And from this point of view, it's very different than Hungary. Hungary starts with a leader. And this impossibility to elect a leader, or leaders in plural, in my view, the more the time goes, is going very much where basically want to follow what Filip said. Something that was your strength in the beginning can end up as your weakness in the next stage.
Yeah, just a brief note on social media. I think that, yeah, the regime lost this battle on social media. The students won it, but we have to be reminded that Serbia is a very old society with a medium 45 something, and older people do watch television and they do get their information mainly from TV. So average voter is not on social media, unfortunately. An average voter is 40 something. We have to keep this in mind. And about this, the way how they are organized and whether it's helpful or not, I think that we need to understand, on one hand, student movement is something unprecedented, unusual, something that nobody could have foreseen, something that is absolutely phenomenal, but it's not sui generis and it's not an insular thing. It's a movement that was created in Serbian society, and I think that as much as it belongs to this Gen Z global phenomenon, it still belongs to it's embedded in all the narratives of the Serbian society are there as well, and we have to keep that in mind. So that's why it's so, I think that's why it tries to have this ideological minimum and not to have polarizing issues, because they know what are the polarizing issues in Serbian society. But I think that parts of the narratives that exist in Serbian society, and discreditation of the position is one of them, also find its mirror in the student movement. So I think that we have to understand that it's not just a thing that happened, it's a political movement now, it's not homogeneous, it obviously has many fractures also inside, and things are reflecting what you have in society can be seen in the student movement, and that's okay. We don't have to romanticize it, and we don't have to idealize it, but we have to understand it as a product of the Serbian society.
Thank you so much for such an insightful contributions. I just have a questions. I mean, you talked before about solidarity and support in Serbia, but what about the international support? Do you have, I mean, any support coming outside Serbia?
Yeah. I think this is the question for the second session, but okay. I would like to say a couple of words at the end of the session regarding I will answer your question. The process of the student movement in the beginning, as you know, they didn't have any political demands. When they started their protest, they had just 4 demands. None of them were political ones. The demands were related to the corruption and to the documentation that they asked regarding the reconstruction of the canopy and on the railway station in Novi Sad, and some other demands. After the 4 or 5 months where they see that nobody wanted to fulfill their demands, they had the new one, which is the parliamentary elections. They call for the early and free parliamentary elections. And now they are changing, from that moment, they're changing then their path and their view. So they, from anti-political movement, they started to become the political movement. And this is something which is very specific. And so that's why I have the trust in their future steps, because I think that they are able to change things in the process, and they are able to see how some things work and doesn't work. And they are, in these past year, they went through many challenges, and they out of these challenges they go in the right way, I think. And now they are preparing themselves and the society for the elections. They want to form the list of independent people who didn't have any political issues and any political experience in the before. So they have some regulations who can be on the list, and one of the regulations is that they cannot be any person who was a member of any party in the past. So this was one of the restrictions. The most of the people who are supposed to be on the list are the university professors from all the state university, but not only the university professors. There are some other people from the public in Serbia, some lawyers, some sportsmen, some actors, some artists, some farmers, some people who supported them from the beginning of their protests, and they want people that they have trust in. So that's why they are somehow in fight with the parties. So according to the polls that we are mentioning, they are now ahead of the ruling party, but they are anti-party. Their experience is anti-party. They don't want to have any joint things with the party, either from the ruling party or not the opposition parties. And according to our rules, when you go to the elections, you can go either as a party or as a group of citizens. So they don't want to make the party for the elections. They want this list, when they is going to be formed, to be the group of citizens who will going to participate in the elections. And that's why in their thoughts, they are against the party as a model, as party as a ruling system, a party as a political option, because they don't have the trust in not just in the ruling party, but in the opposition parties who are really didn't do very much in the past 10 or 15 years in our country. So that's why they are somehow specific. And now they are preparing. They are now in the next step. They are not that much publicly viewed in the street, and they are not making the many, let's say, protests which are gathering a lot of people. But they are now in the other directions related to the preparing the program. They have many different groups which are divided to the topics of the program. The program is going to be very specific and very, very good in terms of what they want to change in the country in the future. But there are some questions that we mentioned here which are unpredictable: when the elections are going to be held, what kind of elections are going to be held. It could be at the same time the presidential elections and the parliamentary elections. It could be one before the other. They could be in this year, or maybe the end of this year, or the next year, or the end of next year, maybe the beginning of 27. So there are many unclear things that they don't know, and we don't know as well. And I think nobody knows the person who is supposed to offer the elections. I think that he also doesn't know when he's going to do it. So I have trust in them, and they are now having many different and other actions. For example, there is actions from village to village, when they go from village to village to talk with the people, the citizens, the farmers, the people who are trying to support them, and I think it's going in the good directions. I say there are many challenges. We can talk about them later. And regarding the support, I think there is no good and not enough support from the European institutions, neither from the European Union, neither from the separate European countries. And we are trying to somehow to do on this articulation as much as we can. So one of this is our roundtable here today. And I hope that we'll do in the future much better to see the voice of our students in the European community.
I think that's a good place to thank you, thank our very informed and distinguished panel. And coffee beckons, and then we'll be back at, well, we're supposed to start it in kind of 20 minutes, and then we'll...
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
The question that I have is for the universities: how much gas do you have in the tank? How much longer can you last? Can you speak to that? The question is, how much longer can you last if they are cutting your salaries, cutting your funding? Can you last a year or two? And then the other question is, don't you need some of the elites to join over, to split away from the regime?
Could we hold those questions and answer them? We want to answer them. Nobody wants to duck the question, but let's have a coffee first, okay?